October 3, 1986. 3 miles beneath the Atlantic Ocean, in darkness so complete it feels like the end of the world itself, something was terribly wrong. Captain Igor Britanov stared at a gauge that shouldn't be moving. But it was. The needle crept upward, slow and steady, like a countdown to oblivion. Around him, his crew of 119 men went about their duties, unaware that in the next few hours, some of them would be dead, and the rest would be fighting to prevent World War III. The K-219 wasn't just any submarine. She was a Soviet nuclear ballistic missile submarine, armed with 16 nuclear missiles, each capable of turning an American city into radioactive ash. She prowled the waters 680 miles northeast of Bermuda, hidden, ready, waiting for an order that would end the world. But right now, Britanov had a more immediate problem. Missile tube number 6. The gauge showed pressure building where there should be none. At 5:14 a.m., a young seaman burst into the command center, his face white as bone. "Captain, missile tube 6, there's liquid in the silo." Britanov felt his stomach drop. Liquid in a missile silo meant the fuel was leaking. And not just any fuel. The Soviet missiles used hypergolic propellant, two chemicals so violently reactive they ignited on contact. If those liquids met, the explosion wouldn't just destroy the K-219. It would trigger her nuclear warheads and turn this stretch of ocean into hell itself. "Sound the alarm," Britanov ordered. "Get me a damage report. Now." Deep in the submarine's belly, 20-year-old sailor Sergei Preminin was already running toward the missile tubes. He didn't know it yet, but he had less than an hour to live, and in that hour, he would save the world. The alarm wailed through the K-219. Men scrambled to emergency stations. In missile tube 6, the nightmare was accelerating. Fuel and oxidizer dripped down the missile, pooling at the bottom of the silo. The chemicals hadn't touched yet, but it was only a matter of time. Britanov had to flood the silo before the chemicals mixed. It was dangerous. The pressure could crush the tube. Kill everyone in the section, but doing nothing guaranteed disaster. He gave the order. Then, at 5:32 a.m., missile tube 6 exploded. The blast ripped through the K-219 like the fist of an angry god. Metal shrieked. Bulkheads buckled. The lights went out, plunging 119 men into absolute darkness. 4 men died instantly, vaporized in a fraction of a second. The others were trapped in compartments rapidly filling with toxic gas, radioactive steam, and seawater flooding through ruptures in the hull. If you're watching this, and your heart is pounding, hit that like button right now, because what happens next is even more intense. And make sure you're subscribed, because this story is about to get a whole lot worse. Britanov pulled himself up from the deck. Blood ran down his face. Around him, the command center was chaos. Sparks showered from damaged panels. Men shouted over alarms that wouldn't stop screaming. The reports came in brutal and fast. Missile tube 6 was destroyed. The pressure hull was ruptured. Seawater flooding compartments 4 and 5. Radiation detectors buried in the red zone. The missile's nuclear warhead had cracked open, leaking radioactive material into the submarine. But the worst news was about the reactors. The K-219 had 2 nuclear reactors powering her through the depths. The explosion damaged both cooling systems. Without cooling, the reactors would overheat and melt down. And when nuclear reactors melt down 3 miles beneath the ocean, that's how you turn a disaster into an apocalypse. Chief Engineer Nikolai Karchenko appeared at Britanov's side. "Captain, we need to shut down the reactors. Now, if they melt down, we'll contaminate half the Atlantic." Shutting down a nuclear reactor isn't like flipping a switch. Control rods had to be inserted manually in compartments that were pitch black, filling with water, and so radioactive that spending more than a few minutes inside was a death sentence. Kharchenko assembled his team. Young men, most barely out of their teens, who understood what was being asked of them. They were being asked to die slowly instead of quickly. Not one hesitated. Among them was Sergei Preminin, 20 years old, with a wife and infant son back home. He'd been aboard only 6 months. A quiet kid who did his job and didn't complain. The reactor team descended into hell. Emergency lighting cast everything in a red glow. Steam hissed from ruptured pipes. Radiation detectors clicked faster and faster, telling them every second was shortening their lives. Meanwhile, the K-219 was sinking. The explosion damaged the ballast tanks. Water was heavier than air, and they were taking on more than they could pump out. Britanov ordered emergency surface procedures. Blow all ballast, force her up toward the surface. It was desperate. Surfacing would reveal their position to American forces, but staying down meant drowning. In the reactor compartment, the team was making progress. Reactor 1 was shut down, but Reactor 2 was fighting them. One control rod was stuck, jammed by explosion damage. Without that rod, the reactor couldn't be fully shut down. It would keep heating, moving toward meltdown. "Get that rod moving, then get out," Kharchenko ordered, checking his radiation detector. The numbers were climbing into lethal ranges. The sailor worked the manual controls. The rod shifted, stuck, shifted again. Then, with a metallic groan, it slid home. Reactor 2 was shut down. "Evacuate. Move, move, move." The team scrambled for the exit, climbing the ladder one after another. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then someone realized. Sergei Preminin wasn't with them. "Where's Preminin?" Kharchenko's voice cut through the chaos. Down in the reactor compartment, Sergei Preminin was alone. The hatch above had swung shut, and the locking mechanism had jammed. He was trapped. He'd gone back for a reason. As the team evacuated, he'd noticed a coolant valve hadn't fully closed. A small thing, except small things kill you in submarines. An open valve meant the reactor could still heat up, meant all their work might be for nothing. So Sergei Preminin made a choice. He turned back. He closed the valve. And now he couldn't get out. Above him, his crewmates screamed his name, pulling at the jammed hatch. The metal had warped from heat and stress. It would take cutting torches to open it, and they didn't have time. Britanov was informed. One man trapped below, 118 men who might still be saved. One life versus many. The kind of equation that turns captain's hair white. "How long does he have?" Britanov asked, his voice flat. "In that radiation? Maybe 20 minutes. Britanov picked up the internal communication system. "Sergei, can you hear me?" Through the static, a voice. Young, scared, but steady. "Yes, Captain. We're going to get you out. I promise." A long pause. When Preminin spoke again, his voice was calmer, like he'd moved past fear into some country on the other side of it. "Captain, is the reactor stable?" "Yes, Sergei. You did it. You saved the ship." "Then it's okay, Captain. Just take care of my family. Tell them I did my duty." In the reactor compartment, Sergei Preminin sat with his back against the bulkhead. His radiation detector had stopped clicking, the needle maxed out beyond measurement. He thought about his wife. His baby son he'd held only once before shipping out. The beach near his home, how the sun looked on the water. The air in his mask was getting stale. His lungs burned. His skin was burning too, from the inside out. On the other side of the hatch, his crewmates were still working, refusing to give up. 20 minutes later, they got the hatch open. But Sergei Preminin was already gone. Still sitting with his back to the bulkhead, eyes closed, looking peaceful. They carried his body up gently, with respect. Some men saluted. Others just stood there, processing what they'd witnessed. A 20-year-old kid who saved them all and asked for nothing except to be remembered. If Sergei Preminin's sacrifice is hitting you hard right now, you need to hit that subscribe button. His story deserves to be remembered, and by subscribing, you're helping make sure it never gets forgotten. Now let's get back to the story. At 6:47 a.m., the K-219 broke the surface. She came up hard, rolling in the swells, listing heavily. Water poured from her damaged hull. Smoke rose from the destroyed missile tube. She looked like exactly what she was, a dying submarine. Within 30 minutes, American P-3 patrol aircraft appeared overhead, circling. Within an hour, American warships converged. The destroyer U.S. Care took up station 2,000 yards away, guns ready. This was the Cold War at its most dangerous. Two superpowers, weapons ready, separated by less than a mile of ocean. One mistake, one miscommunication, and things could spiral out of control. In Moscow, urgent consultations began. The K-219 had to be saved if possible, but couldn't be allowed to fall into American hands. The technology aboard, the missiles, the nuclear warheads, if the Americans captured any of it, the intelligence loss would be catastrophic. Aboard the dying submarine, problems multiplied. Electrical systems failing. Life support intermittent. Fires breaking out in secured compartments. And 15 nuclear missiles still sitting in stressed tubes. Captain Shaw of the U.S. Care sent a message. Do you need assistance? It was loaded. Accepting help meant allowing Americans aboard, giving them access to Soviet military secrets. Britanov consulted Moscow. The answer came fast. No American assistance. Maintain operational security. So the K-219 crew worked miracles with no power, no pumps, no working systems. They were exhausted, radiation sick, and terrified. But they kept working because the alternative was dying. The Soviet freighter Krasnogvardisk arrived on October 5th with supplies and the ability to tow. Tow cables were attached in rough seas, dangerous work made worse by the K-219's instability. But the cables held, and they began the slow process of towing the crippled submarine toward Soviet waters. For the first time since the explosion, Britanov allowed himself hope. Then, on October 6, everything fell apart. The Atlantic storm came out of nowhere. Waves like mountains slammed into the K-219, each impact shuddering through her damaged hull. The tow cable snapped at 11:03 a.m., whipping back across the water. The Krasnogvardisk tried to reattach, but the seas were too rough. The submarine too unstable. They could only watch as the K-219 began to sink again. Britanov knew it was over. They were taking on water faster than they could pump it out. The storm was pushing them down. Prepare to abandon ship, he ordered. The evacuation was chaos. Men scrambled onto the tilting deck. Life rafts deployed. But in these seas, they were as dangerous as staying aboard. The Krasnogvardisk moved in close, launching boats to pick up survivors, heroic work that risked taking them down with the submarine. Britanov was the last man off. He walked through the empty compartments one final time, stopped at the compartment where Preminin's body lay. They'd wanted to bring him up, but the damage was too severe. "I'm sorry," Britanov whispered. Then he climbed to the deck and jumped into the shockingly cold water. Hands grabbed him, pulled him into a life raft, pulled him to safety. From the Krasnogvardisk, Britanov watched his submarine die. The K-219 rolled to port, her stern rising, exposing the damaged missile tubes, the ruptured hull. She hung there suspended between sea and sky, reluctant to leave. Then she slipped beneath the waves. No explosion, no drama, just a quiet slide into darkness 3 miles deep. The K-219 was gone, taking 15 nuclear missiles, their warheads, Sergei Preminin's body, and a piece of every man who'd served aboard her. In Moscow, the Soviet government was furious. Someone had to be blamed. Britanov was court-martialed for negligence, found guilty, and dishonorably discharged. His pension stripped, his reputation destroyed. But his crew knew the truth. Every one of the 115 survivors knew Britanov had saved their lives, that he'd made impossible decisions under impossible circumstances. They knew he was a hero, even if the government refused to admit it. In 1988, 2 years after the disaster, the Soviet Union finally admitted Sergei Preminin's role, his sacrifice, his heroism. He was posthumously awarded the Order of the Red Star. His widow received the medal. His son grew up knowing his father was a hero to history. Captain Britanov lived long enough to see his reputation restored. After the Soviet Union fell, people understood what he'd accomplished. He'd prevented a nuclear catastrophe, saved his crew, prevented World War III from starting over leaking fuel. In 1997, the Russian government exonerated him. His rank restored, his pension reinstated. He was recognized as the hero he'd always been. But the nightmares never stopped. For the rest of his life, Britanov woke up feeling the deck shudder, hearing the alarms, remembering Preminin's voice over the intercom, calm and accepting his fate. Today, the K-219 rests 3 miles down in permanent darkness. The ocean is claiming her, rust eating through her hull. But her story lives on. Sergei Preminin was 20 years old. Think about what you were doing at 20. Now imagine giving all of that up in a cold, rational decision to do what needed to be done. That's heroism in its purest form. It happened in a flooded compartment witnessed by no one, recorded by no cameras, with no glory. Just a young man alone in the dark, doing his job. The K-219's story should make us think about the weapons we build and the young people we ask to operate them. We got lucky. The reactors didn't melt down. The warheads didn't detonate. But luck isn't a strategy. We should remember them. Not just the ones who died, but the ones who survived and carried Preminin's memory for the rest of their lives. They told his story, made sure his son knew what kind of man his father was, refused to let his sacrifice be forgotten. That's how heroes live forever. In the stories we tell. In the moment we stop to think about the 20-year-old kid who saved the world and asked for nothing in return. If this story moved you, if Sergei Preminin's sacrifice means something to you, share this video. Let other people know about him, because heroes don't die when we remember them. The K-219 is 3 miles down in darkness that will last forever. But above, in the light, her story continues. And as long as we tell it, the men who served aboard her haven't really gone. They're still with us, showing us what courage looks like when everything else is stripped away. Thank you for watching. Thank you for remembering. And thank you to the men of the K-219, especially Sergei Preminin, who proved that one person, in one moment, can make all the difference in the world.